Are you worried that Keir Starmer's trying to strangle the private rented sector? In this video, I'm going to break down the 10 key policies that are going to affect landlords in the UK. And more importantly, I'm going to ask this question. Will this bill make it impossible to be a landlord in 2025? Stay tuned, this is a must-watch video if you're looking to get into property or you're already a landlord. The Renters' Rights Bill has now passed through the House of Commons and is with the House of Lords. This will mean the end of the private rental sector as we know it. So how did we get here? Well, if you don't know how we got here, let's just rewind a little bit. The Conservative government first introduced the Renters Reform Bill in May 2023. This aimed to overhaul the sector for landlords and for tenants. After losing the election, that all went to pot, or did it? Once Labour took over, they revived, rebranded and revamped the whole idea of this bill. They called it the Renters' Rights Bill. With an aggressive timeline, Labour's pushing fast to get this through Parliament. It's already gone through the House of Commons and is currently being read in the House of Lords. Well, what exactly is changing? Let's dive into the top 10 policies that are going to affect landlords. End of fixed term tenancies. Say goodbye to fixed term contracts. As the law currently stands, generally a landlord or a letting agent will give a tenant a fixed term contract. That's either 6, 12 or 24 months. After the fixed term, the contract can be extended for another 6, 12, 24 months. Or it can go on to what we call periodic, which means the initial contract just keeps rolling on. Going forward, all tenancies will be periodic from the beginning. There will be no fixed minimum term and tenants will be able to give 2 months notice to vacate a property. This means landlords are going to lose the security of having a fixed term and makes long-term planning more difficult. Rent increase limits. Once the law's passed, landlords will only be able to increase the rent once a year with a Section 13 notice. Now, for lots of landlords and agents, this isn't really any change because we generally do it once a year anyway. But for some landlords, the unscrupulous ones who in the past have increased rent several times through the year, this will be outlawed. It's also going to stop you putting clauses into your contracts to say that you can increase the rent in the first year. The end of no-fault evictions, Section 21. I really hate the term no-fault eviction because a Section 21 is used because it's the easiest process to go through to gain back a property. Of all the Section 21s we've ever used, they nearly always are for rent arrears. There are some loopholes that tenants generally use to get out of a Section 8 eviction for rent arrears. If they pay enough rent to make them 1 day under 2 months in arrears, the case gets thrown out at court. Whereas with the Section 21, we don't have to explain why we want possession back, and the judge should, if all the paperwork is in order, give the property back to the landlord. That's why we use Section 21. It isn't because there is no fault. There usually is a fault, but because of the way the courts operate, it's just seen as the easiest option to gain possession back. But this is going to be banned. Section 21 will be no more, and landlords will have to revert back to using a Section 8 eviction process. This could, and it's expected, to lead to big delays in the courts. When the Conservative government were looking to introduce this change, they had agreed to overhaul the court service before they introduced the banning of Section 21. Unfortunately, Labour have no intentions of doing that, so Section 21 is likely to come in right at the beginning. We're going to get some expanded Section 8 grounds for eviction. What this is aiming to do is to take the place of the Section 21 reasons and put them into Section 8, so we've got one overarching eviction process, which I get, makes sense. However, the whole Section 8 eviction process is lengthy, It's open to interpretation. It's open to, crazy things like somebody spelling somebody's name slightly wrong. That case will get thrown out, and I've seen it many times. So hopefully the rewording and the way Section 8 operates in the future will be a much clearer and a much cleaner process with a court system that's in place to make it run smoothly. A ban on rental bidding wars. Now, where I operate in Hull, there's rarely a rental bidding war. This tends to happen when there's a massive shortage of certain types of property and there's lots of people wanting it. And unfortunately, some unscrupulous agents will advertise a property at a price and then invite final bids from all the people who want to take on a tenancy for that property. That's been outlawed, so you will no longer be able to accept or implement a tenancy agreement for a rental amount higher than what was advertised. Now, we're not sure whether or not this will lead to agents putting a higher price up and inviting offers, which would be lower. This could be a loophole. So we need to see what the actual wording's going to be to see if they cover this off. There's going to be a new tenant and landlord ombudsman. The role of the ombudsman will be to handle disputes between landlords and tenants. This could mean more bureaucracy for landlords because there will be a mandatory registration and of course there'll be a registration fee. National Rental Database. So they're planning on having a national database of landlords and rental property. This will allow tenants to check up on a landlord's history prior to accepting a tenancy agreement. The purpose of the database is to track compliance and enforcement action. This means non-compliant landlords should have nowhere to hide. However, how will the police the unscrupulous landlords who don't register for the Ombudsman service? The way I see it, unless there is a tenant complaint against a landlord that isn't registered on the service, then they won't know that landlord exists. So it's going to be really hard to police. And the difficulty will be getting that policed uniformly across all local authorities, because currently local authorities all work very differently to each other. I see the database as a good thing. There should be no hiding for landlords and it should be all open and transparent. All we need now is the same for unscrupulous agents. Anybody heard of Roper recently? What's happening with that? Limits on rent paid in advance. Some tenants opt to pay 6 or 12 months rent in advance. This is usually because they can't secure a tenancy through either non-compliant referencing, maybe their income is uncertain or erratic, so they'll pay rent in advance to give the landlord some security. Unfortunately, this is going to be ruled out in the future. I do wonder though, whether or not the agent or landlord will be able to hold that rent in a client's account and then release it on a monthly basis to pay the rent as they would normally. As agents, this is what we do. If a tenant has got a monthly AST contract currently, we would release that rent to the landlord on a monthly basis if it's been paid as a lump sum in advance. We're going to need to watch out and see what happens with this one. Stricter rules for student rentals. The whole student market is up in arms at the moment. It's all up in the air because landlords secure their rental on an annual basis when they're dealing with students. So a student will take it for 48 or 50 weeks of the year. This has been stopped because there are no minimum term tenancy agreements, which means a student could move in, give 2 weeks notice, move out. The landlord will then have missed the start of the term for university, for example, and would have an empty property for the rest of the year. So there has been talk about some exemptions for student accommodation, but that's for purpose-built student accommodation, and we're yet to find out for sure whether or not that's going to be expanded to student HMOs, for example, which are operated by the private rental sector and are just normal HMOs opted for student tenants. If this isn't the case, all of those student HMOs are going to come out of the market and go into the private rental sector. That'll have a saturation effect on the private tenants, and it'll mean a shortage for some student areas as well. We'll keep you up to date on this one. Anti-discrimination rules for tenants. Landlords will be less able to discriminate against certain tenants. Generally, this has been done by placing comments on adverts saying no DSS, no benefits, no pets. This will be no longer allowed. However, the landlord still will have the right to reject an applicant. There may, however, be some instances where saying no pets or no children is valid. For example, if you live in a shared HMO with other tenants, to have a pet in that property may well be unacceptable due to phobias of other tenants, for example, or the safety of other tenants. We don't allow children in shared accommodation because we can't safeguard them against other tenants. So landlords will be able to decline applicants as long as they've considered those elements. So overall, Labour's version of the bill against Conservatives' version of the bill is very similar. Labour's bill is being pushed through quick, it's got stronger penalties, and they've introduced things like the database of landlords and properties. As Labour are pushing this through really quickly, it's important that you prepare yourself now. My recommendation would always be to work with an experienced specialist letting agent. The days of self-managing and going round with your bag and collecting your rent are long gone. You really do need to be working with an agent. So will this bill kill off the buy-to-let industry? Will buy-to-let landlords leave in the droves? Well, a lot of them are, but a lot of it is just hysteria and fear of change. There's no reason why in 2025 the buy-to-let landlord cannot adapt and continue to make this a profitable investment. Being a landlord in 2025 will be different, but it's not impossible. If you want to keep up to date on the changes with regards to this bill and other property information, please hit the subscribe button and hit the like if you've enjoyed the video. Thank you.